Well, all of us felt the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic one way or another, of course, and we know it has led to a really dramatic increase in the need for mental health care. And that goes for individuals and group care too. On this Wellness Wednesday, our Sarah Massler donor has more on collective trauma and how we can overcome it.
I'm here with Dr. Heather Schmidt. She is a family medicine physician and the Assistant Medical Director for Employee Wellbeing at SSM Health. Dr. Schmidt, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. So a bit of a heavy topic today, but an important one. So, large events like the pandemic can really impact large groups of people. So let's dive into what exactly that is. So how is that playing into what you call collective trauma?
Sure. So when we think about collective trauma, it really is an event and even an experience and how it affects people in a large group. So when we think about even COVID, so we're coming upon our 4-year anniversary of COVID, and as we all know, it has definitely impacted us all, but it's also impacted us all differently. And so when we think about collective trauma, it usually is something that's pervasive. It's something that is a large scale, like a natural disaster or something like a global pandemic, where each and every person is affected somehow, but maybe not in the same way. And so it does, and we all get through it, right? Like we all continue as an I, like I got through it, you got through it, but we're each different. But what it does is it actually can impact the we and how we actually approach things from a team or from a relationship-based focus.
And so how does collective trauma differ from individual trauma?
Sure. So when we think about individual trauma, a lot of the times we're thinking about each and every one of our life experience, right? How we come to a situation, how we're raised, how we learn to cope as a young child, but also really thinking about how those experiences, whether they were as a child or even as an adult, have impacted us, shapes our view on the world, and so shapes our perspective. And so when we think about individual trauma, it can impact our health long term. It really can actually have implications on our future health status and different conditions that we may develop, but it also impacts our relationships or our ability to not form relationships. And so when we think about collective trauma, it's made up of a group of individuals, right? And so that's why it's such a difficult situation and why we see some things happening where initially when the global pandemic happened, we all came together, and that phases of a disaster, right? We all come together and we all are working together as one, but then that individual trauma and ability to cope, it starts to intervene, if you will.
Okay, so then how do we cope with that collective trauma? I feel like there's a lot of information out there about how you can cope with the individual struggles you have. What about the collective struggles?
So really, I think when we think about that, we have to understand that we all cope differently.
Sure.
But we have to acknowledge that we are all different, that we all have different perspectives, that we've all had different experiences, that it's affected us all different, and validate that. We have to let people know that they belong no matter what, that they are valued, that they are seen, that they are heard, and that we actually all need to stay curious, right? We need to really understand that your experience during an event is different than my experience, and really being able to take that into account before we jump to judgment, or before we even, ideally, before we even react in a situation. So that self-awareness piece is really key in recognizing we've all had experiences, we've all had things in our life that might have overwhelmed us at times, but how do we actually recognize others have too? And so keeping that in perspective as we're talking about difficult situations, talking about really polarizing topics, but really making sure that we understand that each and every one of us we're all important. All of us matter.
Well, Dr. Schmidt, thank you so much for being here today and just talking through this maybe new concept to some of us and how to cope.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Back to you.